All right, hello. How you doing? So before I get into today's video, I just want to give you a heads up that this Sunday, this very Sunday, November 8th, at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, which is 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'm going to be doing a live stream on this very YouTube channel celebrating 100 followers. I have some things that I want to talk about. I was originally thinking of just doing a video. So I'll be talking for prattling on for about 10-15 minutes as I normally do. But if anybody shows up, then this will be an opportunity for us to interact in a live kind of way. You know how streams work. You've been on the internet before. Anyway, so in the last few videos, I've been talking about critique, trying to build up to basically restating a video that I made last week. Tried to define critique as a method of, separating things out and comparing them to each other. And then, yesterday I spoke about particular methods in critique, focusing on the sociological method where you take whatever object it is that you're looking at, and then you relate it to the social forces that, to a greater or lesser extent, determine it. So today I want to talk about the formalist method of critique, which is another approach to doing critique. You're taking some given thing, an object, a cultural object, a piece of art, a movie, book, or even you could do like a historical phenomenon, or you could do literally anything like a car or a some other commodity, a way of thinking or behaving. So you take your object and you relate it to a field. That is what I have, defined personally. How I have defined critique is you take something and you relate it to some context. And in the formalist method, what you're doing is you're looking at the shape of the object, how it appears, how it takes, how it comes into being, how it has the manner in which it presents itself on this material plane, and you relate it to different ways in which things appear. So to try to put that in more concrete terms, I think it's easy to it's easier to understand this if we talk about like literature, for example. There are a lot of literary forms. The epic poem used to be a very popular literary form, poetic form, where the poem is just very long and it talks about really epic shit. It doesn't really define the language or whatever, or like the meter that the poem is going to be written in. They're epics written in many different types of meters, but it's a form. It's a way of writing poetry where you honestly, I shouldn't have used that as an example because I don't really know what defines epic poetry besides the length, but I think you kind of get the picture. At least I hope you do, because I don't feel like defining it more. But like the form is the various types of style, or the various conventions, the various things that are used to present the work. So doing a formal analysis is the formal analysis is involved in literally every type of at least decent critique. Every decent piece of criticism of whatever type of object is going to involve some amount of formal analysis, because doing a formal analysis is really the only way in which to directly address the work in its own terms. It is very important to do formal analysis, because it's really the only way in which you can, because like every other like critical method, you're bringing in some context that may be directly related to the work, but it is some other context. It is essentially alien to the work if we see the work as like an aesthetic object, which is therefore in some way isolated from, for example, like the terrain of feminist thought. Some particular film could directly address itself to the status of women in society. It could really like just beg for a like feminist reading. But if we consider the object in its own terms as an aesthetic object, if we consider the film as a piece of art, then like to do justice to it, we really need to isolate it from the from like particular historical contingencies, such as the status of women in society. Even though the film really wants itself, and like the filmmaker is really like trying hard to relate the object in an inseparable kind of way to whatever field, to the field of feminism. As an aesthetic object, it is essentially isolated. That's my view. I mean, you can have a different view if you want, whatever. There are many different ways of looking at this, but my view is that aesthetic objects, artworks, are essentially in some fundamental way isolated from the fields in which we choose to contextualize them. They're isolated from society. Even Adorno says that aesthetic experience is a different type of knowledge that is separate from like discursive rationality. It's a different type of knowledge. It's a different way of knowing things. And other people say that aesthetic experience is, it's about the experiential aspect. That is what defines aesthetics, but that's a digression. So the idea within the formless method of the formless like method of doing critique is you are relating the various forms of whatever object that you're looking at to like you're doing an intra object critique, where you're relating the various forms that compose one object to each other, seeing how they influence each other. Like we've used the example of filmmaking, which is composed of many different forms like editing and cinematography, mise-en-scène, performance, blah blah blah, sound. So you want to compare those different forms. Those are all distinct forms that go into like composing one overall object, and you want to compare them to each other to see how they relate, to see how they reinforce each other, make one aspect of the work more powerful, blah blah blah. But you can also do a thing where you like look at the forms from other objects and compare them to each other, just as like a standard of difference. You know what I mean? So it's not about historicizing forms in relation to each other, because that would be more sociological, but it's about just like comparing two objects to each other that are different, and in their difference establishing like some criterion by which to again distinguish whatever it is that we're looking at in the object that we are looking at. If you are just comparing if you're doing a film critique and you're just looking at how the cinematography and the performance and all the other aspects of film form relate to each other within this one work, then you don't really have much to go off of. There's no real basis for arriving at any kind of qualitative judgment, or even really any kind of just like more interesting analysis of the work if you don't bring in some kind of external standard. And in other methods we use the external standard that pertains to that method, but in the formalist critique we are using the standard of other types of forms. So the idea again is not to historicize. It's not to make judgments about one form being better than another or whatever, but it's really just to look at the difference between form between different objects. So that's been a pretty unclear video. Just looking at the meaning of the formalist method of doing criticism, and just to try to bring it back to what I'm building towards. My personal interest is in doing a formalist critique because, again, I think it's really the only way in which you can look at an object in its own terms without importing something that is not necessarily present within the work, because I see artworks, cultural phenomena, as being in some way isolatable from their historical social contexts. I guess I mean specifically the aesthetic aspects of a work are isolatable. I think that aesthetics is obviously it is informed and to a greater or less extent determined by the material conditions of social existence, but at the same time I think that it is a type of cognition that is very distinct and separate from other types of cognition, like rational cognition, and therefore I want to kind of like focus on doing a formalist, on developing a practice of doing formal critique in order to get at the aesthetic core of a work. And then I think it is more interesting personally to relate aesthetics as a whole to social reality, because then you can kind of like think about how you can basically think about the future, I think, rather than just looking at the past and seeing how styles have been informed by like social forces or whatever. You can, if you kind of just look at aesthetics and relate it to aesthetics rather than like a particular art work, if you relate aesthetics to social forces and society, then you can, I think, like, yeah, look at the future and make judgments about what kind of style, what type of form is most relevant for a given political purpose, and how style relates to politics and ideology. Um, so yeah, that's my attempt to talk about formalism and formal critique. Tomorrow I'm going to try to follow up and conclude this little series, and just again to remind you that I'll be doing a live stream if you want to hear more of this garbage on Sunday at 4 p.m. I think I said PST, 7 p.m. EST. I hope to see you there.